What makes Matthew Schaefer this year's projected number one overall pick? I'll break it all down, and we'll also dive into the Rockford IceHogs being knocked out of the Calder Cup Playoffs.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Can give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Smash that like button, hop in the comment section below, hit me with your Mailbag Monday questions. Obviously, won't be able to answer them here on today's show, but I'll make sure to bookmark them and answer them this time next week. And lastly, subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already, all of which is 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a massive way in growing the show. And one final shout out that I got to give as well goes out to today's sponsor, which is Monarch Money. Go and take control over your finances by using our promo code LOCKDOWNNHL in all caps at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off on your first year. All right, happy Monday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Opening things up on the show here this week, as I hinted in the final couple of episodes last week, now that we officially know where the Blackhawks are selecting in this year's draft, it's time to begin my 2025 NHL Draft Profiles, where I'll dive into every notable prospect in this year's draft class. I'll go through their strengths, weaknesses, some of the industry rankings, as well as my overall projection of them as NHLers and everything in between. And go and let me know in the comment section which 2025 NHL draft prospect you want to see me cover next. Love doing this. One of my favorite segments that I cover on Locked On Blackhawks. Helps all of us get a little bit familiar with each of these prospects before the big day arrives in late June. But kicking things off, I think it's only right, even, yes, with the Blackhawks selecting third. It's unlikely they're going to come away with this guy, but you never know what's going to happen at the NHL draft, especially with Kyle Davidson as your general manager. But I wanted to open things up with this year's projected number one overall pick, Matthew Schaefer, a very special prospect, 6'2", 183-pound left-handed defenseman who's still only 17 years old. Should he go number one overall, that would make 3 consecutive number one overall selections being 17. And Schaefer is actually the youngest of all of them, younger than Bedard, younger than Macklin Celebrini. This kid isn't going to turn 18 until early September. And he's so young, Blackhawks fans, he's just 10 days removed from being part of the 2026 draft class. So obviously there's a ton of runway, a ton of upside. And while it was unfortunate that we didn't get to see much of him in his draft year, when we did, he was pretty gosh darn good. And as well as his mold, I think is why he's been able to basically hold on to this consensus, for the most part, number one pick in this year's draft class, even when being off of the ice for much of this season. But in 22 games in the OHL with the Erie Otters, where he was playing alongside Blackhawks prospects Martin Misiak and Ty Henry, Schaefer tallied 7 goals and 15 assists for 22 points in those 17 games. A very small sample size, of course, but was the 4th most points per game among OHL defensemen in their draft year since 2012, behind only Zane Parekh last year, who was on an offensive frenzy, as well as Evan Bouchard and Tony DeAngelo, 3 players who have been pretty effective offensive defensemen in the NHL. Matthew Schaefer was right behind them at number 4. We also got to see him a little bit play for Team Canada at the World Juniors. That's where he unfortunately suffered that broken clavicle that forced him to miss the remainder of the season. But in those 2 games that we saw him for Team Canada at the U20 World Juniors, let me remind you all, as a 17-year-old, tallied 2 points, 1 goal, and 1 assist, and really looked comfortable at that level. In fact, pretty much was capable of taking on top defensemen minutes for Canada, despite being the second youngest player on their roster, right? Aside from Gavin McKenna, he handled it all really well. And, unfortunate that he got injured. We didn't get to see more of him in that tournament in particular, but every other time that he's suited up for Team Canada, A, they usually win the darn tournament, and B, he's had very impressive showings. 6 points, 2 goals, and 4 assists in 5 games for Canada at the Hlinka Gretzky, where they won gold, helped Canada win gold at the U18 and U17 World Juniors. So this kid's a winner. He's a big part of them winning. The only real knock on him is that he was unfortunately injured and also missed the beginning of the OHL season with mononucleosis. When he was on the ice and when he has been on the ice representing Team Canada in some of the bigger stages for a prospect, he's absolutely thrived. Before I dive into his strengths and weaknesses, I want to start with some of the rankings from the top scouts and analysts in the industry. Elite Prospects has Schaefer ranked number 1. So does Bob McKenzie. So does Craig Button. Tony Ferrari actually has him ranked number 2. McKean's Hockey has him at 1. Daily Faceoff has him at 1. Dauber Prospects has him at 1. The real black sheep of the rankings crew here is Chris Peters, who actually has Schaefer ranked 7th, but Hockey News as well has him at number 1. So for the most part, as advertised, most folks think this kid is going to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 draft class. But diving into Schaefer's strengths and weaknesses, there is so much to like about this kid. If you haven't already gone on YouTube and looked up his highlight reel, it's easy to see why, despite only playing 22 games in the OHL this year, teams are most folks think he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. First off, what stands out about Matthew Schaefer immediately is the skating and the upside that he has because of it. Great skating mechanics, overall top level speed, and it just seems like he effortlessly is able to glide around the ice and make plays and close gaps in such a hurry. And what I also love about his skating is he uses different gears to kind of trick defenders in order to get by him when carrying the puck up the ice. And I also think one of his biggest assets is just how aggressive and fearless he is for a player of his age. Again, playing against multiple years ahead of him at the World Juniors for Team Canada, and looked very comfortable. It looked very natural for him. And the way he goes about his business on the ice is playing with the puck. Loves to carry it up the ice himself, can skate through traffic in order to create plays in the offensive zone. And also, I love his physicality in order to get the puck back. He's never going to be someone who throws like booming hits out there, but he'll stand you up at the blue line. He wants to get that puck back as fast as possible. All parts of his game, I would say, he carries a super aggressive mindset. And then he also has just really special creativity and playmaking abilities. I love that he always keeps his head up. He's always looking in front of him, seeing the play develop. And that goes along with just his really savvy hockey instincts and the way that he can make plays happen. Love the way that he moves the puck when quarterbacking the power play unit. And I also love the great head fakes that he has too. He's very deceptive out there when he does have the puck. You don't know whether he's going to continue carrying it himself or if he's going to move it and continue being part of the play. Very aggressive, very deceptive. And when you have a high skating ability on top of it, that's what makes this kid what a lot of people think is going to be a top pairing defenseman at the NHL level. He has really good stick handling ability too. Not only is it the skating that helps him carry the puck with success, but he also has really good hands. He had a couple of highlight reel goals in the OHL this year, can skate through a couple of defenders to open up lanes that you didn't think were there. And all of these skills, I really do believe, is what shapes him up to be a really good puck-carrying defenseman at the next level, and that's how you want your best defenseman to play the game, in my opinion. And then he can use his large frame to his advantage. There's still room for him to grow in that aspect, but like I mentioned, he's not afraid of being physical. He has that aggressive mentality with and without the puck. And just having that mindset, I think once he does fill out his frame a little bit more, is going to going to do him some favors. And he is a pretty capable defender. I think his best asset is how he can get the puck out of harm's way in a hurry, A, through his own skating, and B, through the passing. Good first pass ability as well, and just good overall recognition in the defensive zone. I think he's always going to be known more for his offensive abilities and his offensive tendencies, but is a capable defender. 6'2", has some good size on him as well, which is why people think he can be a good two-way defenseman in the NHL. As far as Matthew Schaefer's weaknesses, there's really not that many with this kid. The one thing I would say he really needs to improve upon is his shot. You don't really see Matthew Schaefer shooting a ton of one-timers. Most of the goals that he scored this year was because he was playing against lesser competition. Scored a couple of breakaway goals, which obviously doesn't happen very frequently for a defenseman at the professional level. And it was stick handling and skating was mostly how he scored his goals. It wasn't blistering shots from the blue line. Didn't really score all that many goals from far out. So there definitely is another level for him to get to in his shot, which I think translates over to this next thing that he needs to improve upon, which is just getting stronger. Typical things you talk about, especially with defensemen going into the NHL draft. So not all that surprising, but while he does have an aggressive mindset, and I talked about how he can lay some hits out there, there are also times where he lets the opponent get the better of him in those one-on-one battles, and they can toss him around a little bit too easily and keep the play going. So there's still another level for him to get in terms of the physicality and the strength, which will come with time, which will be easier for him to do once he has an NHL regimen. And that will also, in theory, you would think, help his shot get a little bit more stronger and help him be a little bit more diverse with his all-around offensive makeup, which is already pretty special without a high-level shot in his arsenal. And by the way, those are all things that Matthew Schaefer can improve upon, and I think a lot of people expect him to improve upon again when he gets to that next level and just is in the proper professional environment. So as far as my projection of Matthew Schaefer, very easy to see why most people think he's going to be a top pairing defenseman of the future. I firmly agree with that assessment. He has the skating, he has the stick handling abilities, super aggressive, confident in himself, very poised for a man of his age, right? And doesn't get scared of the big moments. So I really see him as a puck-carrying menace of a defenseman in the NHL, someone who's going to operate the power play very effectively and want out there in all big offensive situations. I really think he's kind of a combination of, he has Miro Heiskanen's body, about 6'2", not very thick though, and I don't think Matthew Schaefer is ever going to be someone who gets up over 200 pounds, but he also has Cale Makar's movements out there. I don't think he has the same goal scoring upside like Cale Makar does, obviously, just scored 30 this year for the Colorado Avalanche. He kind of reminds me of a little bit of a bigger Quinn Hughes, someone who's probably going to be a point per game defenseman in this level because of his skating, because of the way he thinks the game, because of his passing abilities. Always going to be known more for his offense, but can be a capable defender too. I really see Matthew Schaefer in that same mold, and he probably even has higher defensive upside than someone like Quinn Hughes. I don't know if it's quite Miro Heiskanen's level, but being 6'2", when you expect him to get stronger and fill out that frame a little bit more, you would think he's going to be a capable NHL defender because he's not as undersized as some of those other guys that I just mentioned. So two-way play, offensive upside, high-end skating ability, still super young and tons of runway. I firmly agree with most scouts and analysts that Matthew Schaefer is going to be the #1 overall pick in this year's draft. As far as potential for the Blackhawks getting him, very slim to none. I think this is a slam dunk pick for the New York Islanders. I think to have Matthew Schaefer and Noah Dobson as your core pieces of the future blue line, yeah, that's a good idea for the New York Islanders. And even if they were to select Matthew Misa, San Jose would be ludicrous to let Matthew Schaefer fall out of their reach. They're still needing another defenseman to add on the back end. So don't think the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be getting Matthew Schaefer, unfortunately, but I still wanted to go through his draft profile on the show today, as there is a debate about whether Michael Misa or Matthew Schaefer is going to be this year's number 1 overall pick. I obviously haven't dove through Misa on the show here yet, so a little bit of a spoiler alert. But I really do believe it's going to be Matthew Schaefer once late June rolls around. But that takes care of Matthew Schaefer's 2025 NHL Draft Profile. Super excited for the NHL Draft Profiles to be back here on Locked On Blackhawks. Make sure you go and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of those, which will basically be dropping every single day leading up to the 2025 NHL Draft. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, make sure to stick with me as I'll dive into the Rockford IceHogs blowing a 2-0 series lead to the Milwaukee Admirals. Real quick, though, I do need to talk to you all first about Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's real easy to lose track these days. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you complete visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center so that you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place and stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And what I personally love about Monarch is that instead of juggling multiple financial apps at the same time, which can definitely become a hassle, I can just use Monarch to check my finances, track my spending, and even plan my long-term goals. And to go and take control of your finances, go and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off on your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com with our code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for half off on your first year. Segment 2, tough scene for the Blackhawks minor league affiliate Rockford IceHogs yesterday as they fell 4-3 in overtime to the Milwaukee Admirals in Game 5 as they blow a 2-0 series lead after winning their first 4 games of the Calder Cup Playoffs. Had great momentum on their side. 2 games to close it out back at the BMO in Rockford, only to lose 3 consecutive games and have their season come to an end. Absolute heartbreaker for this young IceHog squad. And as I mentioned, just seemed to have their momentum gashed when they returned back to Rockford. A blowout loss there in Game 3. Had an opportunity in Game 4 up 2-1 after 2022 third-round pick Aiden Thompson scored his second professional goal, up 2-1 there in the middle frame. IceHogs are unable to close it out. They wind up losing that one 3-2, and then in Game 5 back in Milwaukee, you knew that one was going to be tough. You did not want to go back to Milwaukee for that pivotal Game 5, especially because this is an Admiral squad that not only is much more experienced than this young Rockford IceHogs group, but they also overcame a 2-0 series deficit in the first round of the Calder Cup Playoffs last year to the Texas Stars. So they found themselves in this exact same situation before. They knew they were capable despite being down 2-0. They get a big win in Game 3. Feels like there was just a little bit of a momentum shift there. They claw their way out to Game 4. And I just had a bad feeling when that happened about Game 5 for Rockford. Definitely sucks to see the season end this way, but undoubtedly an awesome experience for a lot of these young players who are hoping to make the NHL roster out of training camp next year, playing under the gun in those high intensity, high leverage moments. I know it stings for all of them for their season to end this way after starting the Calder Cup playoffs so well. And I mean, all the adversity that this group has had to deal with this season between Anders Sorensen obviously being promoted to the big leagues. Mark Eaton, a front office executive, comes in as their head coach. They have numerous players, basically anyone worthwhile on their roster, go up to the NHL there late in the season, still manage to clinch a spot in the Calder Cup playoffs, best of 3 play-in series, take down the opening 2 games there to move on in the first round, and had a very experienced Admirals bunch on the ropes. I know it didn't go their way, but I'm super proud of all of these young kids. They definitely should be holding their heads high despite the outcome. And I really do believe it's only going to bode well for a ton of these kids. And to see a lot of them, get these meaningful opportunities, not only just get their feet wet in the Calder Cup playoffs, but be playing pivotal roles for this group. I mean, Artem Levshinov inside the top four, Kevin Korchinski and Ethan Del Mastro on the top pairing. And Del Mastro's a guy who was in the Calder Cup playoffs last year, right? Colton Dock returned for this first round series against the Admirals. He's someone who's a little bit familiar with Calder Cup playoff activity, and just adding more experience under their belts should only help them in that next step in their development come the fall. And as I mentioned, a lot of these guys, Artie Levshinov, Kevin Korchinski, Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen, who kind of struggled in the Calder Cup playoffs, I thought, as well as, Colton Dock on the offensive side of things. Drew frickin' Comesso in net. All of these guys have aspirations of making the big league club next year, and their final bit of action, again, I hate that it ended the way that it did, but should give them a little bit of an extra confidence going into the start of next year. And it should be fascinating to watch how all of those training camp battles are going to play out. There should be a handful of them going down in September and all throughout October. But we're now officially in off-season mode for the entire Blackhawks organization. I know Frank Nazar, Alex Vlasic playing for Team USA, Teuvo Teravainen playing for Finland, Arvid Soderblom playing for Sweden in the World Championships. But basically off-season mode now for the entire Blackhawks organization. They don't have any prospects left in the OHL playoffs, don't have a single prospect in the QMJHL or the WHL. The IceHogs are now knocked out of the Calder Cup playoffs. So the next time we'll see meaningful action for the organization will be for the 2025-2026 season. And again, a lot of those kids that just played meaningful postseason action for the IceHogs going to be gunning for a job on the big league squad in training camp. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's episode, still got to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your week. And for your second listen, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned in the Stanley Cup playoffs, have been hitting so far here this spring. You can get local analysis on a national scale with Locked On NHL Game Night, and you can easily find that on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, Mailbag Monday weekly fan segment. Reminder to everyone who's watching right now on YouTube, hit me with your Blackhawks question below in the comment section. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, you can reach out through any one of my social media platforms. You can email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com, or you can even just drop it in the review section on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'll still be able to see it there. First question that I'm getting into here today comes from Zane Mandel, who emailed in the podcast and said, Jack, thanks for all your hard work on the show. Had a couple of questions for you. 1, who do you think takes the C next? I assume Foligno will retire after next year, so would it be Vlasic at that point? Will Bedard be ready, or could it be a wild card like Frankie? Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and actually it was something I was mulling over to myself not all that long ago. Look, I 90% expect it to be Connor Bedard. They're just, I think, kind of, I don't want to say grooming him to be the next captain, but it was certainly the right call, I think, to wait, not rush him into the sea as a 19-year-old. Yeah, it had success for Jonathan Toews. Connor Bedard is a lot different of a human being than Jonathan Toews. He's not necessarily that natural, outspoken leader, and that's, not for better or worse. They're just two completely different people. But I do still think Connor Bedard is shaping up to be the Blackhawks' next captain. But if it's not Bedsy, I do really believe Alex Vlasic is the next likely candidate, and for good reason. I mean, really been here since the ground level of the rebuild. I joked a couple of weeks ago on the show that he's the old man of this Blackhawks blue line, despite being pretty young in his own right. But he's just kind of one of the young OGs, I guess, if you will. But I mean, plays and handles himself like someone who's going to wear a letter for this team for a long, long time. Whether that be a C, whether that be an A, I'm not exactly sure, but I definitely expect Alex Vlasic to have some sort of patch on his sweater for this Blackhawks team for a long time. Frank Nazar, I think, is one of those guys too. Just the way that he goes about his business, top six skill set, fourth line grinder type of mentality, can play on the power play, can play on the penalty kill, selfless and skilled. What's not to love about Frankie Nazar? So I definitely think he's someone who's capable of wearing the A for the Blackhawks. I do believe Alex Vlasic is the more likely candidate to be the captain. Bedard's still number one, though, firmly. Second question from Zane is, any free agent names to watch that we haven't talked about? Find it hard to believe Mitch Marner is going to sign with a bottom-tier team, even for more money. The Mitch Marner conversation is going to be fascinating and will be even more fascinating depending on what goes down in this second-round series between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Florida Panthers, considering the Leafs had a 2-0 lead, but now it's 2-2 going to Game 5. But outside of Mitch Marner, if the Blackhawks aren't able to secure him with a hefty bag, I think there's three pretty clear-cut top names in free agency. And the reason I say that is because while there are a handful of good players in this year's free agent class, the Blackhawks really need someone who can help drive play, who can carry the puck and make plays happen out there. They just need more playmakers on this roster. And the three that really stand out to me in free agency outside of Mitch Marner are Brock Boeser, is someone who I have talked about on the show. I think Matt Duchene is a sneaky good, maybe couple year filler for the Blackhawks, potentially someone who, in a similar sense to Ryan Donato, I don't know if I want to sign on with him long-term, but I'd give him like 6 to 7 million or even just something in that ballpark for a 2-year deal if he's willing to sign on short term. Had a phenomenal season, obviously, this year. Even though he is a little older, he is someone who can drive play and certainly would be a help to the Blackhawks top six. The other name I would throw in there is Nikolai Ehlers, although I haven't really been happy with the Stanley Cup playoffs. I know he's probably dealing with a little bit of an injury, but I would have Boeser and Duchene both ahead of Nikolai Ehlers. Those are really the three, if the Blackhawks don't get Mitch Marner, that I think they need to be looking at. Next question comes from Isaac Guerrero on YouTube, who asked, question for the mailbag. Trade. Hawks have tons of cap space and picks. We want Michael Misa. Yes, we do. Isles have zero cap space and RFAs to sign. Isles trade to Hawks Lee plus his $7 million hit for 1 year and the number 1 overall pick. Hawks trade Isles both our 2025 first round picks for New York number 1 overall pick. We want Misa and get a 30 goal scorer in Lee. Isles trade Lee, save $7 million and sign restricted free agents like Holmstrom, Dobson, Siplikov. They pick Hagens with 3rd overall pick plus another 2025 first round, maybe add a 2026 second round pick as a sweetener. I like your thinking, Isaac, and I do really believe there is a possibility the Blackhawks trade for Anders Lee. I just don't know if the Islanders are going to be willing to move on from the number 1 overall pick when, as I just outlined in segment 1, Matthew Schaefer, again, because he's so young, he has decent size at 6'2", with his skating ability, his confidence, creativity, and playmaking upside, like I said, he shapes up to be a point-per-game defenseman at the next level, and I just don't know if the Islanders, with their limited prospect pool and kind of a bleak future at this point, are really in a position to go and trade that pick. I don't hate the thinking whatsoever, Isaac, and I do think the Hawks would probably have to throw in, I guess, a little bit more since they get Misa and Anders Lee, who's going to be helping this team right now. I think there is something to be said there about a deal between those two teams involving Anders Lee. I just don't think it's likely involving the number 1 overall pick for the Islanders because of their position. Next question comes from Michael Greener 4959, who asked, how about Jeff Halpern or Corey Stillman for next head coach? Both longtime NHL careers, both with assistant NHL coaching experience. Halpern with Tampa Bay, 2 cups, and Stillman with Carolina, also as a director of player development for them. Stillman also won 2 Stanley Cups as a player, junior head coach experience for 2 years at Sudbury, and more recently in Guelph. Also, magnificent job as HC of Canada's gold medal U18 World Championship team. So still good candidates out there. And I do agree, there are still good candidates out there. As far as kind of what I'm getting a sense of, I don't know if necessarily these are two top options for the Blackhawks. If they are going to go with someone who is currently an assistant NHL head coach, I think they want someone with experience. Obviously, I've seen CHGO throwing out a lot of potentials about maybe Jeff Halpern leaving the Tampa Bay Lightning. If you can't go and get John Cooper, go and get John Cooper's assistant. I certainly don't hate that mentality. And I wouldn't hate, Jeff Halpern I'd probably have Halpern ranked over Stillman personally. I wouldn't hate either of them to be candidates for the Blackhawks job. I wouldn't be upset to see either of them get interviews. I mean, rightfully so. They've obviously been very successful in those spots and been around successful organizations. I just don't think they're necessarily top guys on the market, especially when the Blackhawks, I think it's unlikely in the first place they're going to be hiring a first-time NHL head coach. If they do, it's probably someone with a bit more experience. Next question comes from Darren Wilcox 4683, who asked, Mailbag, Jack, would you trade the 2025 first to Tampa for Isaac Howard if it's a third or fourth overall and Misa and Schaefer are off the board given how underwhelming this draft class is? Isaac Howard, for those of you who don't know what's going on with him, 31st overall selection for the Tampa Bay Lightning a couple of years ago, played at Michigan State, actually. He and Artie Levshinov were both freshmen for the Spartans last year. Really solid team. Someone the Blackhawks organization should have gotten a lot of pretty good looks at. Isaac Howard has also been part of Team USA's roster for the World Juniors, scored some big goals to help them win gold, and had a phenomenal sophomore year with Michigan State to win the Hobey Baker. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be signing his entry-level contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Would I be willing to give up the third overall pick for Isaac Howard? No, I would not. Would I be willing to package a late first-round pick along with something to go and try and get Isaac Howard? Would I go and make an effort to be the highest bidder? Yes, absolutely. I think this kid has the capabilities to maybe not be a top-line player at the next level, but a good middle six piece, and has a skill set that I think would translate well to the NHL level. The problem is he'd be another undersized forward for the Blackhawks. But we'll ask questions about size later. If you have the ability to go and get Isaac Howard, you have to at least go and try, in my opinion, especially when he has a connection, a decent connection with a couple of prospects for the Blackhawks playing together at the World Juniors and growing up playing for the United States development program as well. I'm going to be having an episode coming out on Isaac Howard in the next couple of days here, so don't really want to spoil my entire thoughts on that, but I wouldn't be giving up the third overall pick for Isaac Howard, but I think the Blackhawks should be in those conversations. Last question I'm going to answer here today. And again, a reminder, if you're watching or listening to this right now, make sure to reach out with your Blackhawks-related question, either through the YouTube comment section, through any one of my social media platforms, or you can even email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. Final question today comes from Henry Woldry, who emailed in the podcast and asked, excited for prospect time, Jack. Do you think the Blackhawks are more likely to trade up or trade down in the NHL draft? Thanks. I got to go with, I guess this is kind of a interestingly worded question. As far as number 3, they're definitely more likely to trade back than they are to trade up, I would say, just because of the unlikelihood of, I think, the New York Islanders or the San Jose Sharks moving either of those picks in a pretty clear-cut top 2 draft, with both of those teams really wanting to add to their prospect pools. I would have to say moving down is more likely than moving up, but I don't really think either are likely. I do think the Hawks are going to stay put and select at number 3. However, we know GMKD has been very active during the NHL draft, so I firmly expect them to move up at some point, whether that be from their late first-round selection that's from Toronto, or their early second-round selection, their late second from Dallas, whatever it may be. I think GMKD is probably going to have some guy circled that he wants to go and get, because the Blackhawks are at a quality, not quantity point any longer in their prospect pool. And having so many draft picks, they can certainly afford to go and move up to try to get guys that they want in particular. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be on the lookout for my next NHL Draft Profile that'll be dropping tomorrow, so you don't miss out on that. Go and hit that subscribe button, or you can also follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and that way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.